Well, good evening and welcome to the Commemorative Air Force Warbird Tube webinar for this evening. I'm your host, Steve Buss, and we're glad that you can join us for the session tonight. This series is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. You can support CAF through our membership or donations. And for details on how you can further CAF's mission to educate, inspire, and honor, please visit our website at commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you enjoy tonight's presentation, if some questions come to mind, you can type them in the chat box, or if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, just put a comment there. Leah is monitoring all of our social media channels, and she'll forward the questions to me. We'll try to answer them inside the presentation, but if not, we'll save some time at the end to answer any questions. So if something comes to mind, just type it in and we'll get you an answer before we sign off this evening. Tonight, we are going to talk about the A-26 Invader night mission. And joining us, Patrick Mahaffey, Dave Canton, Cody Gill, Buddy Cooksey, and Kevin Hong. I think this is probably the largest panel we've had to talk about any airplane. So that must mean that the A-26 is a pretty special airplane to all of you. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Pat, let's start with you. How did you become involved in aviation and specifically with the A-26?
Well, my father was in the Army Air Corps in World War II, and then became a aerospace engineer at Vought for 50 years. So I kind of had aviation in my family. I started flying when I was 15 years old, and I came to be with night mission. It was at the Vintage Flying Museum hangar where I've been doing most of my Warbird flying my entire aviation career. And that airplane showed up several years ago, and one thing led to another. Next thing you know, I'm elbow deep in the airplane. Here we are.
All right, Dave, how about you?
My father was a pilot for 30 years in 3 wars with B-24s in World War II, B-26s in Korea, as they were called then. And actually A-26s in the beginning of the Vietnam War, and then C-130s. So I'm an Air Force brat. I've been attached to the A-26. It was his favorite plane by far. And I met Night Mission in 2017. Took a ride in the flight engineer's seat, and I've been in love with it since.
All right. How about you, Cody?
Well, I'm not a pilot, not yet. That's on the long list of things to do, is to get a pilot's license. I happen to know a few pilots, so I'm sure they can steer me in the right direction. But my aviation passion, if you will, started from my grandfather. He was a fighter pilot in World War II. He flew P-47s in Europe, and then he ended his Air Force career working with. Ended up in a B-36 Peacemaker as a radio operator. So I would hear stories growing up of his, that he would tell me, and I wanted to get involved. I've been involved with a lot of nonprofits with my wife, and she told me that it was time for me to find something for myself. And I looked online, and I'd always heard of the Commemorative Air Force and seen it at air shows, and I just showed up to a meeting one day, and the A-26 just intrigued me. I didn't know a lot about it at the time. I had heard of it and I'd seen it, and but I didn't know a lot about it. And showed up, and it was one of those things that, like Pat said, your elbows deep before you know it, and then they wouldn't let me leave. So, here we are.
That's awesome. And Cody, you made a good point without realizing you made it, but CAF is not just made up of pilots. There are a lot of folks who are not only pilots, but also mechanics, A&Ps, IAs, and then there's just a lot of people who are just interested in the history of World War II aircraft, and there's a place for everyone in CAF, so you don't need to be a pilot. There's always a way for you to be involved, so glad to have you aboard, Cody. I'm going to jump over to Kevin Hong. Good evening. Tell us a little bit about you and your interest in aviation and the A-26.
So I've always went to air shows as a kid. My father was in the Air Force and got me into aviation, and started joining the CAF with the B-17, and kind of grew with other units. And it's interesting because Buddy and Rich Gentheimer came up to me. It was at Corsicana Air Show, and they said, you know, we got a really interesting plane that you probably want to look into. And so started off looking into the A-26 and, you know, telling me the story about it. And then I remember looking at the airplane in Midland, how it was, hasn't been assigned to a new unit after Spirit of Waco. So started from there and learning more about the airplane and working with the airplane, and just a fascination. And, you know, the airplane became a labor of love.
Awesome. And speaking of labor of love, you've got a lot of aviation photographs that some of which we'll see tonight in the presentation, but you've been shooting at air shows, very talented air show photographer.
Well, thank you.
And I guess we saved the best for last. Buddy Cooksey is also with Night Mission, and Buddy has been around the CAF for, I'm not allowed to say how many years, but it's been more than a couple of. Buddy, welcome, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, my background actually, like most kids growing up in the 50s, World War II was still very fresh, and I built just about every kind of model there was to build of World War II aircraft. And A-26 was kind of like you didn't hear a lot about it, but it was just a cool looking airplane. And, you know, it just kind of gets in the back of your mind about it. And then while I was going to college, Uncle Sam decided that I would be best served, or I could do a better job if I was to sign off on his draft letter. And I thought, well, no, that's not going to work. So I joined the Navy, and Navy trained me as an aircraft mechanic. And that was pretty cool, and got to see a lot of things, go a lot of places, and decided that aviation was a good situation. And from there, well, after I got out of the Navy in 1970, I joined the CAF in 1972, and shortly thereafter became a pilot, and then started flying CAF airplanes, and I guess it was 1973. And so from there, just different equipment that we flew at the time. And, you know, like most people growing up and having a World War II knowledge and stuff, you kind of think the B-17 is the airplane. And I cannot dispute that. It is a great piece of equipment. And I get to fly it, and I got to say, I love flying that airplane. But in the early 2000s, Joe Nimmer from the Ranger Wing down in Waco invited me to check out in A-26. At the time it was called Spirit of Waco. And I thought, that might be pretty cool. I think I'll give that a shot. And it became love at first flight, as they say. I was just astounded by its performance. And me being a corporate jet pilot, I'm pretty, you know, felt pretty good about performance, but this airplane just absolutely blew my mind. And like I say, it became love at first flight. And so as time passes, what else can you say? 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engines. What's not to love?
There you go. Well, let's talk just briefly about the history of the A-26. I mean, it is introduced late in World War II, but also served roles in Korea and Vietnam. But whoever's going to pick up the historical baton at the moment, is tell us a little bit, just basic history of the 26.
Okay, well, since silence is not golden, so basically the aircraft was I'm going to say, came after what Douglas had a very successful twin-engine attack aircraft called the A-20. And it was a twin-engine, very high performance for its day. And the British loved them, and those that received those airplanes loved them. But as time goes on, they decided there's got to be a better piece of equipment coming, because they really don't know how long World War II is really going to last. So Douglas got to work and built this airplane, designed it, built it. And as far as I remember correctly, it was built and assembled at Long Beach, Douglas Aircraft at Long Beach, California. And it was an instant hit because of its speed and its ability to do high altitude flights or whatever it needed. The airplane was very, very versatile. And it came out with something that was still relatively new and not a lot known about, was a laminar flow wing, which basically is a high performance wing for this aircraft. And only one other World War II aircraft had that, and that was the P-51 Mustang. And so this airplane just rolled off the assembly line as a performer from the get-go. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, that's not the right. Fortunately, World War II ended early, and they capped the production on these things, a little over 2,000 aircraft. But it was so good, it immediately went to work when Korea broke out. It became a primary piece of equipment for interdiction of the communist forces, and was really a good airplane in that area. It became kind of like the forerunner of today's A-10 Warthog. Following that, after Korea, the airplanes were pretty well worn out, or so they thought. And there was nothing else in the scheme of things or in the plans, Department of Defense plans, to replace it until Vietnam came around. And they needed something that was quite capable. So they modified a lot of the existing A-26s that were left into what they call the K model, which upgraded the engines, upgraded avionics, upgraded the aircraft overall, strengthened the wings, gave it more firepower, and it really did become quite the insurgent aircraft. And from there, they just flat wore out the last of the A-26s. That's kind of where we are with them today.
Yeah, well, and the A-26, the history of that aircraft spanning three wars, very similar to the Skyraider, which came out, end of World War II, played a role in Korea and Vietnam, and really testament to, the last of the big piston powered aircraft that could really, they were great designs that kind of stood the test of time. And the A-26, of course, still flying today at air shows. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't kind of mention its little sort of foray into controversy, and that was the A-26 was used in the Bay of Pigs invasion in the early 60s.
Yes, it was. And, there's a lot of political stuff involved in that. It did what it was supposed to do. It was very functional. And unfortunately, the outcome wasn't what was desired, but the airplane did do a marvelous job in that realm or that theater.
Yeah, we actually had somebody that was involved with the Bay of Pigs, and he was actually a Cuban, and we were at the air show, and he came by, excuse me, and he had mentioned his time around the A-26, and so it was a miraculous airplane for the speed and its role.
And Dave, did your father relate any stories of his time flying with the A-26?
A lot of, when you talk to World War II or even Korean vets, unless you ask the right question, they don't tell you their stories. At least that's what I found. And it's and what I've gotten involved with in additional to the A-26 is marshaling. And one of the things I enjoy when I'm out on the ramp is seeing someone come up that looks like he was there before. He was part of the original group. He's a World War II vet or a Korean vet. And they, you have to ask them the right questions to get them to tell you stories. And I didn't ask my dad a lot of questions. In Korea, he flew 50 missions. The A-26 in Korea, and it was a B-26 at that time because it had a little flip-flop of A versus B over history, dropped the first bomb in Korea and the last bomb. And his role was in reconnaissance, and he did 50 missions reconnaissance alone at night. And I can only imagine what it has to be like flying in pitch dark in rugged terrain. And I guess I can't think of another plane I'd want to do that in other than something like a V-26.
Definitely an incredible airplane. And let's talk specifics about the current airframe that we're featuring tonight. That is the A-26 night mission. What's the history of this particular aircraft?
Well, it was built and delivered on December 8th, 1944. One of the earliest B-26s off the assembly line, as a matter of fact. It came out of Long Beach, construction number 7140. It kicked around the United States, Florence, South Carolina, Hobbs Field, McClellan Air Force Base, stayed stateside the entire time, never saw combat. And finally was sold, taken off the record and sold into the civilian world in 1950. Scrap dealer bought it, and it kicked around a little bit more. And then this Texas Railway Equipment Company of Houston bought it, and it was sent out to Glendale, California, to a company called Grand Central Aircraft, which is a lot of people have heard of Van Nuys, the other on-mark Aviation. A lot of people have heard of that work, heard of that company, but not many people have heard of Grand Central. They converted several of the A-26s to an executive configuration because it was such a fast airframe. It was the Learjet of its day. The big companies that needed executive transports would love to get a hold of these airplanes because they were so fast and efficient for their day. So it was converted, got an executive interior installed, had the air stair door installed under the belly that you can see to this day. Some of the later versions had air stairs installed on the side, like you'd see in more contemporary aircraft. And then it was purchased by Barnwell Drilling Company of Shreveport, Louisiana. It was one of their executive transports along with several of their other airplanes. And I think we have a picture coming up pretty soon, a color photograph of it in its red and turquoise paint job. I think that's a picture of it you see right now. It's when it came right out of Grand Central. That's a very, very early photograph of the airplane after it came out of the conversion from Grand Central. And then Barnwell Drilling caught it and painted in its lovely red turquoise paint job. But to this day, if you look underneath the wing near the oil cooler inlet, or excuse me, oil cooler door exhaust, you'll see some of that turquoise paint is still on the airframe to this day. After that, after Barnwell got rid of it, it kicked around a little bit more. And then in the 1970s, it had a very, let's say, colorful career as a drug runner. In fact, it became quite infamous because the airframe was so fast that the DEA, or whatever they called themselves back in those days, could never catch it because it was so quickly, and it acquired the name the Gray Ghost. And got quite a reputation as being able to always be one step ahead of the authorities on their drug running missions. Well, all good things must come to an end, and the airplane flew an engine in Amarillo, Texas, and the current operators made a hasty retreat before the authorities arrived, and there it sat. It was impounded by the sheriff, and the then Confederate Air Force purchased it and went to the Ranger Wing and became the Spirit of Waco. And through a series of events from it, operated Spirit of Waco for a very long time. I can remember when I was a little kid in the 80s, I somewhere have a picture of me under the nose of that airplane back in the mid 80s when I was just a kid. It was then turned into headquarters in Midland at that time, and it became part of the Invaders squadron and was brought out to Beecham Field in 2012. And it's been working on. We've been working on it, flying it out of the Vintage Flying Museum at Beecham ever since. And it's been getting a little bit better and better every year.
Let's talk a little bit about the in that previous picture we saw. It was still in the gray paint scheme that probably gave it the nickname the Gray Ghost before the CAF obtained it. But it moved into the black paint scheme. Is there that first, the Spirit of Waco? Is there a history or a story behind the move from the silver color to the black?
If there is, I have not heard it, other than the fact that the particular unit, that was how their aircraft were painted during Korea. And if you'll notice a lot of photos from Korea, that was pretty much it. They either had the black with the red cowlings or yellow cowlings or maybe even white cowlings. And the logic behind that was they were mainly used for night interdiction and kind of help camouflage them. That was pretty much the predominant paint schemes after World War II and through Vietnam. Well, I can't say that. Vietnam, they used the olive drab and the camouflage paint schemes.
My
Let's talk about-
father was an avid photographer, and I have a lot of his pictures of the planes and the runway in Korea, and they're all black. All the V-26s are black in his pictures. So I think what Buddy said is right on target.
Well, I traced back the history about the A-26s, and I did find one particular unit in Italy in World War II that had black A-26s. So I don't know particularly if that is what started the trend or not, but Kai Putnam was one of the members with the B-17, and he flew Black Widows, and I had asked him about the black paint schemes on Black Widows, and he said one of the reasons why they did that, of course, is you're flying night missions and reconnaissance missions not to be seen by spotlights. But at that time, between the Black Widows and the A-26s, they're pretty close to the time when they're developed and being used for wartime, World War II. And one of the things he said to me was, for the matte black and for the reflection of spotlights, that was one of the reasons why they started looking at going into painting airplanes black for at night. So, you know, when that exactly rolled over from World War II to Korea, but I did chase back a few photos, and there was a squadron in Italy during World War II that had black A-26s.
How did the airplane make the transition from Spirit of Waco to night mission?
Well, that's kind of one of those interesting backstories that probably it's kind of hard to describe. I thought Spirit of Waco was a great name on the airplane, and it was a good marketing tool. The airplane was known throughout the air show industry as Spirit of Waco. And the powers that be, when they formed the Invader squadron, decided that they wanted a whole new name for it, and they bounced around with a couple of different ideas. And because basically the airplane main function during Korea and Vietnam was night missions, either reconnaissance or interdiction of enemy forces, they just came up with the name Night Mission. And Kevin came up with the outstanding t-shirt design for us that kind of matched that scheme. And so I think it's starting to get quite the reputation around the air show industry of being a really good performer, and I think it's going to do even better in the future.
That sounds good. When you look back at the A-26, it's, as you said, Buddy, is a very speedy airplane. And it's in fact faster than some of the fighters in World War II, which I think probably led to its longevity, being able to fulfill a number of roles after World War II. But what's it like to fly the A-26 itself?
Well, I can tell you from someone that used to fly corporate jets and the great performance they have, my closest analogy to this airplane is at low altitude, it's got jet-like performance. It really can perform. And it's quite capable of 300 plus miles per hour. And so not a lot of piston engine airplanes can say that. And I got to throw a attaboy toward the nice folks at Pratt & Whitney for building the R-2800, because that was used on a lot of different aircraft during World War II and afterwards. And it is probably one of the all-time great engines that, and you match that 2,000 horsepower engine, but two of them on an airframe as nice as this one, you've got performance plus.
Just real quickly, what are some of the speeds of the aircraft? Takeoff, climb, landing speed, stall speeds.
Pat, you're the most recent on that one. Go for it.
Takeoff speed is going to be around, you're going to rotate around 120 miles per hour. This airplane is a lot different than the World War II aircraft in the way that it takes off and lands because of the wing design, laminar wing, and also the flaps on this airplane. If I had to pick one system on this airplane that I would say is the most complex system on the airplane, I would say it would be the flaps. It's the double slotted flaps that you see on most airliners today. And this is one of the very first times they were ever introduced on a production aircraft. And it really changed the performance characteristics of this airplane tremendously. It was able to take off and land at a relatively slow speed, which was actually a lot faster than most World War II airplanes. But then once you got the airplane cleaned up, it would just scream on you. Takeoff, like I said, around 120 miles per hour. I've had this airplane at at a cruise climb power doing almost 200 miles an hour climbing about 500 feet per minute. Air show wise, I have seen 350 miles per hour coming across the pyro field at air shows before. And I tell you what, that never gets old. That is just an absolute hoot to see that airplane wind up like that. And it's not even really struggling that hard either. It's not like you're maximizing the performance and you're right on the ragged edge. That airplane is just sloping right along at 350 and it loves every minute. It's a very, very, very easy, docile handling airplane. The stall characteristics, it'll stall around with the flaps and gear down, it's going to stall right around 105 miles an hour. So it does land a little bit faster than like I said, most World War II airplanes. The DC-3 that I fly, the approach speed on the cruise speed on the airplane is the approach speed on an A-26. You're going to come down final approach around 150 miles per hour, and then slowly deploying flaps, get it around to where you want to cross the fence about 115, 120 miles per hour. And because of the way the wing is designed, you notice, especially the classic example is the B-25. You see it come in and it pulls that nose way up into the air, and its nose is way high, and it touches down lightly on the mains, and then it just glides down the runway with the B-25 with the nose wheel up off the ground until it finally slows down where it stops at. If you try that with an A-26, you're going to rattle your fillings because it's going to fall out of the sky and it's going to slam down really hard. It lands in almost an absolute flat attitude. You've got to barely raise the nose up to get that nose wheel clear so you don't touch down the nose wheel first. But you do not ever want to bring it into a high-pitched attitude close to the ground. That photograph a few frames back of the silver and black Spirit of Waco with it in that attitude kind of makes me cringe a little bit because it's like they were in for a solid landing on that.
I believe Kevin may have a story on his surprise at the speed of the airplane.
Oh yeah. Well, first got introduced to the A-26, and we had to do some photos to do a photo mission. And Jim Ryan had the T6, and Buddy, decided, he goes, well, we'll let Jim fly the H-26 and Buddy will be my photo ship pilot. And he sat back and, Jim looks at him and Buddy looks back at him and keeps asking the question, is the T6 fast enough to fly with the A-26? And I said, okay. A couple times that happened. I was like, is the A-26 really that fast? And Buddy says, you have no idea. So get into the airplane, do a 360 around, and A-26 gets on the runway and starts taking off. Well, as soon as the plane lifted off, in the landing gear gets sucked into the airplane, and that airplane is gone. I could not believe the speed and acceleration of that airplane. And he says, keep track of him because he's going to meet up with us in a few seconds. And sure enough, he did. And that was just something incredible. I'd never seen an airplane with such speed like that and climb that quick. So it was pretty neat.
I can remember back real quick. I can remember back to the first air show I was in. I was going as the flight engineer, and I had not had the opportunity yet to really be in an air show performance. I'd flown in the plane some, and we were flying formation at the time with the P-51 and with Texas Raiders, the B-17, and we're all in formation waiting our turn, and they had it where we were going to go last at the air show, and apparently, we're out in the pattern, just ways away, just kind of Kevin's taking some photos of us from the B-17 from Raiders, and as we're flying, the air boss comes on and said, "Hey, acro performance finished early, A-26, bring it." And all of a sudden, we just left everybody behind like they were not there. I couldn't believe. I mean, it throws you back a little bit. I couldn't believe the speed. And then we came into the air show and came back behind the crowd over, and we were doing about 350, I think 350, 355 when we came over the crowd. It was it was a lot of fun.
Well, and this next picture kind of illustrates the speed of the A-26 to be able to hold formation with the B-1, and the B-1 does not look like it's hanging on the ragged edge of stall either. So it's an amazing photograph.
Yeah, that particular deal was something special because that happened to be the 30th anniversary of the B-1, and I worked with the Air Force, and they had their issues thinking that the A-26 wasn't going to be fast enough, and I said the airplane's going to be fast enough. And when I told them 350, they said, well, 350 is fast enough, or we don't even need to put the flaps down. And the first practice we did it, the guys were just totally blown away because it looked like the A-26 was just leaving them. And so the next day, the guy said, "Gee, that's a pretty fast airplane." And so that's the first time that any Warbird has ever flown with the B-1, and especially as a light attack bomber, to do that, to be able to do that with the B-1, the Air Force, they were pretty impressed that that we showcased something special, and to showcase two different bombers of two different eras together. Set a precedence. The B-1 can do well over Mach 1, and the A-26 was very fast as well. So very special.
Yeah, an absolutely amazing photograph, and I'm sure you alluded to took quite a bit of coordination to pull that off.
Yeah, it was 6 miles out was what the B-1 guys wanted to do the join up. And different speeds, it's prop versus jet, so that was one of the things that they wanted to figure out was the timing to do the join up and make sure the B-1 guys were able to slide in position in formation. The similar formations are kind of rare to do with the Air Force, and it took about 2 years to talk them into putting it together. But as you can see, it was pretty magical. First time we did it, I looked back at Buddy and I promised him years ago that I would do it, and he said that was pretty special.
Indeed. Well, let's talk a little bit about the current state of the airplane. It's down for some maintenance and repairs. What's the status of Night Mission right now?
Right now we are at the hangar at Meacham, and we are we have pulled off the left engine off the airframe. It's just we decided that it needed a little help, so we have removed it from the airplane. And as you can see in that photograph right there, we've removed all the cylinders from the engine. What you're seeing right there is basically just the power section, the rotating section, the crank, the master rods, the blower, the nose case of the engine. We're going to send that off to the engine shop, and they're going to break all that apart. That takes some really specialized tooling and equipment to get that section apart and back together correctly. I have learned so much in the last few months just disassembling this engine, getting it off the airplane. This picture right here, I'm going to just kind of walk you through as we'll go through these pictures. This is us putting the engine on the hoist and the crane to get it loose. And what people don't really understand about the neat thing about the A-26 is that the technology that from just even 5 or 6 years before to when this airplane was produced, the advancements that they made in not only the wing design but just in the construction of the airplane is incredible. For one thing, the engine mount is actually a part of the nacelle. Normally, you take the engine cowlings off with DC for your B-17, you see a big steel tube engine mount that the engine's bolted to, but actually this thing slides inside a section of the nacelle, and then when it's time to remove the engine, you actually pull that section of the nacelle off, and the entire thing comes off with all of the electrical and tubing inside and everything. You just have to disconnect the stuff at the firewall, and so the actual nacelle is an integral part of the engine mount for this engine. And then we put it in that fixture, which basically holds that entire engine and nacelle assembly in that fixture right there by the crankshaft. We put that in, and I thought, there's no way this thing's going to hold this whole assembly up. But sure enough, it did. And that fixture, there's a World War II engine teardown in this build-up fixture. That's quite the lifesaver. We can rotate the engine, we can turn the engine up on its nose, we can turn it horizontal like this, and we can get to any part of the engine we need to disassemble it. So what you're seeing right there is basically it just came off the airframe just moments before, and then we got to the point where we had to remove the rear section of the nacelle and then start tearing the cylinders down. And all that's left is the gray section underneath, and that's where we're going to send it off and get repaired. And while that's off getting it repaired at the engine shop, we'll be taking the rest of the parts that you see there, the nacelle, the firewall, the oil tank, oil cooler, all that's going to get cleaned up and restored, and any repairs that need to be made are going to be done. And when it goes back together, it'll be in a lot much better shape. And there you can see the rack with some of the cylinders and the pistons sitting next to them. Everything's going to be tagged, everything's going to get cleaned, inspected, repaired, and it won't leave the hangar again until it's in great shape, ready to go.
Are there any components of the aircraft that are particularly difficult to find? I know with a lot of the World War II aircraft, it's not very. You can't just go to AutoZone and pick up parts off the shelf. But with advances in technology, CNC and 3D printing, all those sorts of things have helped. But are there some items in the A-26 that make it maybe a little more difficult to keep flying than some of the others?
Well, the A-26 in general is a little bit more difficult to maintain than some of the other World War II airplanes. Everything's very compact. That advancement where they made the nacelle part of the engine mount also kind of makes it a little bit confining to get up in there just to do general maintenance on the engine. People were smaller back then, and I'm certainly not the smallest person in the world. And some of those hatches that you have to squeeze up through to get into the back there to work on the engine are pretty confining. So just actually the physical part of getting into something to work on it can be a bit of a challenge on this airframe because everything's been tightly compacted into smallest spaces possible. We were lucky that after the war, they were used as executive transports, and they were also used for quite a bit, especially in Canada, as fire bombers. So there are still airframe parts around. They're getting harder to find. You do have to know your sources and outsource these things quite a bit. We do have to have some parts made. Currently, one of the things that we're looking into having remade are the fuel tanks. The original fuel tanks are self-sealing rubber bladders. So basically, if a bullet went through this rubber, it was designed in such a way that the hole would close around, the rubber would close up around where the hole came in and seal the tank back up. But anything that's rubber product from 1940s is starting to get a little bit long in the tooth. So fortunately, there are companies out there that can fabricate new fuel tanks. The A-26, the V-26K model that also shares the hangar with us has some new fuel tanks manufactured, and that's a big help. So we were able to get those done. It just takes a few dump trucks full of cash to get stuff like that done. I would like to quickly shout out to the Special K guys. We have the A-26 K model in our hangar, and the collaboration between the two organizations. You cannot imagine having another airplane of your type in the same hangar, and not a week doesn't go by that you go, hey, look what we found. Hey, look what we found. Hey, look what we found. And that sharing of knowledge really, really goes a long ways, because the manuals tell you a lot of things about working on these airplanes, but the oral histories of the guys that actually worked on them go even longer ways to getting these things, keeping these things maintained the way they keep.
Well, you mentioned a Special K, which is a K model, A-26. What are some of the major differences between Night Mission and Special K? We're looking at the early A-26 to late model A-26.
Well, I've had the privilege. I've gotten to fly both airplanes, and they fly completely different. It's amazing. They're the same airplane, the same airframe, but they are not the same airplane. The handling characteristics of both airplanes are a little bit different. I would say that the Night Mission handles more like a sports car, nice like a Corvette, whereas the K model handles like a very solid, fast sedan. When you sit in the K model, the instrument panel is completely different. It's got a lot more instrumentation to it. It's got things like torque meters and fuel flow indicators, which Night Mission does not have. It's got an upgraded version of the R2800, the last version types of engines that they made of the R2800. And with that, with those two tip tanks out there, the bigger propeller blades on that frame, and it's a joy to fly the airplane too. But they're totally different airplanes, and I like them both for different reasons. But I really do love Night Mission. It's a great flying airplane. Every time I get into it, it's just you can't help but just smile the whole time you're there.
Concur.
Absolutely. It's even fun on the back seat too.
Now, is Night Mission part of the Living History Flight Experience program?
It is on the program. Yes, it is. Go ahead, Pat.
Hopefully we'll get back to being able to do that here in the near future once we get the engine back together, get the airplane running the way we want it running before we fly it again. But then we'd like to definitely sharing this airplane's no fun unless you can share it with people. And when it sits in the hangar for long periods of time, that's not the same as getting it out on the road and taking it to air shows. And people don't really know this airplane like they do other airplanes. Unfortunately, the unfortunate thing about the A-26 airplane was it never had an airframe like the Memphis Belle, like every movie in the world has knows that airplane. It didn't have a mission like the Doolittle raid bombing Tokyo, but it was just a solid workhorse, and it was really a transitional airframe between piston engine airplanes and jets. You really see, that's why you see a lot of similarities between flying this airplane as a piston airplane and the jet-like performance, especially on approach and landing with the way the wings designed. You see a lot of that transition between the 1930s technology and then on into the 1950s and beyond technology. So taking out to the air shows, letting people crawl through it, and they get to see how fast it goes and what it sounds like. It's really great to share it with people, and Living History is a great way to do that, with sharing with people. Quickly, one thing I'd like to say about being on air shows: the most asked question I ever get about this airplane is this an A-26 or a B-26? And the answer is
yes.
Yes. I think if the Air Force if anything that the Air Force did to confuse the entire world was make the Marauder and the Invader the same call letters at one time or another in history, because I spend more time at air shows trying to explain the difference between a Marauder, an A-26 Invader, and a B-26 Invader, and anyway.
Well, as long as you've broached the subject, for those who don't know, give us the 10-cent version of what happened to cause that that confusion.
Well, okay. Well, so in World War II, there was a Martin B-26 Marauder, which was a medium bomber. It had R-2800 engines as well, but it was an older design. And the A-26 Invader came out a couple of years after the Marauder came out, and it was considered an attack airplane. Well, after World War II, the Martin B-26 Marauder was stricken from the inventory. And when the United States the Army Air Corps became the United States Air Force, they started redesignating things, including they changed the Douglas B-26 Invader to the Douglas B-26 Invader. The airframe stayed the same, but the designator just changed. To add to that confusion, I'll go one more on this. In Vietnam, the K models were going to be operating, I believe, out of Thailand, if I'm not mistaken, or Cambodia. And they would not allow bombers. Yeah, NKP. They would not allow bombers to depart from their soil. So they redesignated the B-26K Invader the A-26A, so it wasn't a bomber. So there you go. There's probably the 20-cent version.
That's all right. And it is an interesting piece of history. I mean, there were a lot of things that happened between the Army Air Corps and the Air Force, but I'm always fascinated by the A-26/B-26 story, because it goes back and forth and has not only the operational aspect to it, but also the political aspect of it. In Vietnam, and decisions made more than 50 years ago, no one ever knew they would continue to confuse audiences at air shows in 2021. So it's just one of those interesting twists of history. What are some of the plans? Going back to the living history experience, when you do those flights, how many passengers can you take on board the airplane?
Oh, you want to handle that one?
Yeah. So we have up in the front cockpit what we call our flight engineer seat. Will be one person, and then we usually we'll have a loadmaster in the back. So we'll have a 3 crew operated, and then so passenger wise, we can haul 5 people in the back and 1 person in the front is our full load capacity for it. And then I have yet to experience a flight with other people where they didn't get off grinning from ear to ear as soon as they climbed down those steps.
So Cody, tell me, what does it sound like when you're sitting in the airplane? If you're not in the front, in the cockpit, almost in front of the engines, what does it sound like in the back?
Well, even in the back, we make sure and hand out earplugs. I mean, it's a roar that and a lot of people flying are used to commercial aircraft. When you take off, it kind of pushes you back in the seat. The A-26, when it takes off down the runway, it throws you back. I mean, I like watching everybody's facial expressions for takeoff, and you'll start just seeing it as soon as we increase power and you hear those engines rumble and everything starts shaking. You see the smiles start coming up because they feel the forces pushing them back, and it's a loud rumble. I mean, that's a lot of horsepower coming right at the side where everybody's sitting, and it's impressive.
It's a lot different. I mean, that's a lot of people sit there and they'll fly on the B-29 or B-17, and it's just a enjoyable ride. But when you're flying in the A-26, you really do feel a little bit more G tolerant, pushing down on you, because it's so much faster. So basically, it's like flying in a larger P-51 where you're banking and making turns. You really do feel a little bit more G push into you.
That's awesome. What are some of the plans for the airplane once you get the mechanical ends sorted out with the engine? I mean, are you looking at doing any interior restoration on the airplane itself?
Paint job, paint job, paint job.
Are you planning on changing the paint from what it is now with the black and yellow paint scheme?
No, we love the paint scheme, but basically that's still the old Spirit of Waco black paint on that airplane. Well, part of me likes it because it does represent a very combat weary looking airplane right now because of the way the paint is. It's like I said, you can start seeing some of the old Barnwell drilling turquoise coming through on the bottoms of the wings. But you know, not only just for appearances, but for airframe preservation, it'd be nice to get a good quality paint job on it that would last a lot longer. However, we do have agreed we do not want to put a glossy, slick, Gulfstream clear coat, shiny paint job on it. We want it to still have that kind of dull military workhorse paint job. This isn't a show. This isn't a Learjet. This is a workhorse, and we want it to still kind of reflect that. But yes, we're continuing to restore the interior, instrument panel. We'd like to get the instrument panel back to more of a World War II configuration, because when they configured it for executive transport, they changed the instrument panel quite a bit. Another interesting note that a lot of people may not know is that the A-26 was originally a single pilot aircraft. The control yoke on the right side did not exist. It was only meant to be a single pilot airplane, and the engineer and bombardier, if it was a glass nose version of the A-26, would sit on the right side. So the instrument panel actually stopped about where you see the radio stack on this picture. It was all contained to the left side of the cockpit, and the right side, for the most part, was open. So I'd like to go back to more of an original World War II war configuration like that. We'll probably have to make some concessions because the guy on the right side does need a few instruments to do his job. So
That is interesting. That's something I didn't know about the A-26 until tonight. That the Bombardier Navigator really did have. It was not a dual control airplane. So there you go. Learned something new tonight. Go ahead.
Training. They turned them into training aircraft, and so they added the second set of controls as a trainer for the most part. And the trainer versions were the ones that the civilian market was most interested in.
In the little bit of time we have left, if any folks have any questions, please type those in the chat box or in the comment section. We'll give you a few minutes to do that and answer any questions you might have. Someone was going to jump in. I think I stepped on you. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to comment about the right seat is actually on a glass nose. That's the passageway to get to the bombardier seat, and the seat folds back, and I guess the control moves out of the way. And Pat, you can explain that probably better than I, but it's the right seat is like you say, it's not a flying seat, and
right on the single control versions, there actually wasn't a control column there. There was just a bench seat that the Bombardier Navigator sat on, and you can kind of see down below here where those rudder pedals are. There's a passageway into the nose. Since this is a solid gun nose airplane, there's no need to get there because everything was loaded before the mission. But if it was a bombardier nose, that would be the passageway to get through to the nose section. Interestingly enough, on the K model, on Special K, that control column on the right seat actually can be removed by pulling a pin, and the instrument panel on that side of the airplane is hinged, so you can unlatch it and swing it out of the way. But on night mission, those two columns, both control yokes are permanently mounted, and the instrument panel is solid. But like I said, and we'll keep the dual control because it would just be silly to convert it back to a single pilot operation for not only for logistics and for training, but it would like to be neat to put it back into more of a configuration.
A couple of questions coming from the audience. Here's one. Any truth to the story that Night Mission was specifically named after Captain Walmsley's airplane in Korea?
No, it was not. That was not the name of his aircraft. No, that was one we came up on our own. And needless to say, Walmsley was a Medal of Honor winner. He did great things, and we cannot do anything but honor him. But kind of like Texas Raiders, we picked a name that covers the whole spectrum of all the people that flew them, and that's kind of how these names come about.
Were A-26s used in any of the Reno air races through the years?
Yes. Didn't do well against the highly modified airplanes, but it did okay.
And when you say the highly modified airplanes, you're talking about the
Unlimited.
Mustangs and Bearcats in the unlimited category. It's really pushed the envelope of Warbirds.
Exactly.
Well, good. Well, just a couple of minutes left. I'd like to give each of you just a brief opportunity to kind of maybe sum up or have some closing thoughts on the A-26, or also most importantly, how people can get involved and support the mission of the Invader Squadron and Night Mission. So, Pat, we'll start with you.
Okay. One thing I would like to say, and this kind of coincides with my own story, is that I hear a lot of people, how do I get involved in Warbirds? Man, this is so awesome. You get to fly these cool planes. How do you do this? Blah, 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 blah. And for me, it was basically a little bit of luck, being in the right place at the right time, but it's also tenacity. So you've got to really want to be interested in these airplanes. You really want to be around them. And it takes a lot of patience before you go to being able to get into the left seat of one of these airplanes and fly them. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but I spent many, many years. I started out on the D-17. You all remember Chucky from the old, back in the 80s. I wandered in. The story about how I got involved with that would take an entire webinar, so I'm not going to get into that. But I started with the owner of the airplane. Basically, took one look at me and said, "Welcome aboard. Don't touch anything." And we know Doc Hospers knows exactly what I'm talking about. But I started out keeping my hands in my pockets, sleeping on the floors, handing the guys tools, trying not to be too much of a pain. And I just kind of slowly crawled up that ladder from gopher to, hey, help us fuel the airplane, to, hey, help us tow it out of the hangar, to, hey, you've got some mechanical ability, help me change this propeller. Hey, you want to fly on the way home from the air show in the right seat? Yeah, of course I do. And then the next thing you know, I'll get type rating in the airplane. So there's opportunities out there. No matter where you live in the country, if someone's got an old airplane, there's a museum, there's an organization that commemorates Air Force. It's not just in Dallas, it's not just in the Midlands, not just in Harlingen or Texas. Commemorative Air Force is everywhere. There are wings everywhere that always need more people to help out. And we're no exception. If you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and enjoyed the story and enjoy what we're doing, feel free to come out and help us. It's a lot of hard work. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. There are days when you just can't believe how much time and effort goes into getting so accomplished sometimes. But the rewards are amazing. The payoff is incredible. And if you have any kind of interest in stuff like that, don't be dissuaded, don't be discouraged. Keep up, keep at it, and come out and help us, or whatever organization you feel like you would like to get involved in.
Can I pile in on Pat's statements there?
Sure.
CAF has in excess of 80 units, coast to coast, border to border, and even international. So, as Pat says, the opportunities are plentiful. We now have exceeded 180 aircraft in our fleet, which is really phenomenal. We are the largest Warbird operator in the whole world. And so if you're even thinking about being interested or consider it, Go out on CAF online, and all the units are listed, and you can find a home really easy in this outfit.
And I guess, Kevin, since you're kind of the social media expert here, how can people follow Night Mission itself?
So there's a couple ways. On Facebook, you can look us up for CAF Invader Squadron, and also on invadersquadron.org for our website. There's also a donate button as well. If you're encouraged, to donate money to us, and also 12 Planes of Christmas is coming up, so that's another thing to do. But it's not just about the aviation, but it's also the culture. For living history, flight experience for us in the CAF, it's about the legacy, right? We've gone to many air shows where we've been a part of a STEM program, and we've talked about laminar airflow and the other things, the characteristics of the H-26, what they do. But it's inspiring the younger generation. And when we sit there, we talk to the kids, and they love it. I mean, they you get the little twinkle in their eyes, and you can tell exactly which kid is going to be the next generation of pilot and the aviator. So that is the beauty of flying with the Commemorative Air Force. And so, as you guys mentioned, I'm a photographer, so it's a human interest side of the stories, sharing them with the veterans, but also looking at them and just continuing the mission to keep the history alive. And when they go to look at the airplanes in the museum, they can't hear the noise, they can't see and smell everything. When these airplanes start up, there's smoke, there's noise, all of those things. There's just something about that you can't explain. Once you experience it, you catch a bug, and you just continue on to do whatever you can to keep these airplanes flying.
Well, you mentioned smoky and noisy and rumble and all the wonderful things that go along with warbirds, and we are on the eve of the Wings Over Dallas World War II Air Show, which is going to take place at Dallas Executive Airport this weekend. Looking forward to seeing many of you in person at the show. Weather looks like it's going to be great, and we've got a great lineup of aircraft that will be representing the CAF fleet. So if you can come out and join us at Dallas Executive Airport, that would be wonderful this weekend. And if not, we will also have coverage on the Commemorative Air Force Facebook page, so you can keep up to date with what's going on. If you've not been to Wings Over Dallas, it's a great mixture of World War II aircraft and also World War II veterans sharing those stories. And as Kevin mentioned, to educate, to honor, and inspire, that is the mission of the CAF. So with that, we're going to wrap up our session for this evening. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And thank you, the audience, for joining us for another CAF Warbird Tube webinar. If you have any suggestions for some personalities you'd like us to talk to, or aircraft you'd like to know more about, just drop Leah Block a note at media@cafhq.org. We'll be back next Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Central Time. Until then, I'm Steve Buss, your host for the CAF Warbird Tube webinar series. Have a great night.